Hello. Okay, so it's time for part two of Harriet Tubman's story. We left off Thursday. We read the first five chapters. Um, and so now today we will finish. Oops. Okay. So chapter 6, General Tubman. Oh, trying to make this bigger. Okay. Saving Charles Neal. In time, Harriet set up a house for her family in Auburn, New York. It was wonderful for them to be together again, but Harriet's work wasn't finished. Many people remained trapped in slavery. Harriet could not save everyone, but she often gave speeches about the need to abolish slavery. Abolish, end. All right, so there she is in Auburn, New York. Because Harriet was so popular, she was paid to speak at events. Harriet always saved her money to continue her important work. Sometimes Harriet's work came to her by surprise. On April 27, 1860, Harriet was visiting Troy, New York, when she learned that a former slave named Charles Neal had been captured while looking for his wife and their children. Harriet disguised herself as an old woman, found Charles, and helped him get away. Others helped him escape to a nearby city. So, can you imagine how angry slave owners and slave catchers were at Harriet for freeing so many people? They were pretty angry. There she is, helping Charles Neal. But Charles wasn't safe yet. Slave catchers tracked him and captured him again. This time, Harriet and others stormed the building in which he was being held. They freed Charles once again, this time for good. When slave owners heard that Harriet had helped rescue Charles Neal, they were furious. They increased the bounty for anyone who captured her. Harriet's family and friends were worried for her safety. They convinced her to stop using the Underground Railroad, but Harriet soon found another way to help. So a bounty is that price that they put on her head to be captured. A respected leader. America's Civil War began on April 12, 1861. Northern states that wanted to end slavery formed the Union Army. Southern states that wanted to keep enslaving people formed the Confederate Army. Many enslaved and freed black men served in the Union Army. Some women, like Harriet, served as well. The governor of Massachusetts, John A. Andrew, was an abolitionist. He knew that because of her work, Harriet was very familiar with the terrain of the South. That's the land of the South, or the layout. He asked her to help Union troops there. He said, "Harriet, you are to act as a spy, scout, or nurse as the circumstances require." Massachusetts Governor John A. Andrew. Harriet said yes and was sent to South Carolina, where she worked as a nurse and spied on Confederate soldiers. She also served as a liaison between Union soldiers and enslaved people. Soon, Harriet was so respected in the Union Army, she became commander of intelligence operations for the Union Army's Department of the South. 9 men served under Harriet's command. One of Harriet's biggest successes was in 1863 when she led some 150 Black Union Army soldiers along the Combahee River in South Carolina to rescue more than 700 slaves. So the myth was that back then only men joined the Union Army, but the truth is more than 400 women served in the Union Army as soldiers, nurses, and cooks, and in other occupations. In Harriet's case, as a spy as well. Harriet's service ended in 1865 when the Union Army defeated the Confederate Army. All enslaved people in America were soon given their freedom. Sort of. So 1860, Harriet helps Charles Neal escape slave catchers. 1861, the American Civil War begins. 1865, slavery is abolished in America. Chapter 7, more work to be done. Ain't that the truth? One big family. When the Civil War ended, Harriet was grateful. Black people were finally free. Harriet went home to Auburn, New York to care for her elderly parents. Many of her family members joined her there. Sadly, Harriet was unable to save everyone in her family before slavery was abolished. She was unable to rescue her older sister Rachel and her sister's children, Ben and Angerine. But Harriet was thankful for every loved one she did save. There's her helping her parents. After slavery ended, many Southern states created new laws called Black Codes to limit the rights of former slaves. Harriet saw how these laws made it hard for her people to find work or health care. Many Black people were still poor, and others became very sick. Harriet saw all Black people as her brothers and sisters. She turned her home into a boarding house to provide food and shelter for those in need. Harriet met her second husband, Nelson Davis, when he stayed at her boarding house. They married in 1869, and together they ran a farm and a brick business. In 1874, they adopted a daughter, Gertie. So the myth was that life was easy for Black people when slavery ended. But Black people still suffered after slavery. It would take almost 100 years for them to be granted equal rights under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So just to think about that in terms of slavery ended, it took 100 years for civil rights to pass, but we still see from the time of 1964 to today about 60-ish years that things are still difficult. We're still seeing police brutality, targeted criminalization, inequitable housing and jobs, but progress continues to be made. So that is what we will focus on, the work until things are truly equitable. Jump into the think tank. Why do you think life was so hard for enslaved people once they were granted freedom? Remember, they had formerly lived on plantations as the property of their owners. If you watched the lesson from last week, I would encourage you to do so because I further explain why life was so difficult for people after slavery ended. Taking care of other people was expensive. Harriet had served in the Civil War, but the military didn't pay her as they'd promised. She had to use money from her farm and business to run her boarding house. Later, when Harriet was paid for 2 biographies written about her life, she knew exactly what she would do with the money. A home for the poor. Harriet dreamed of creating a home and hospital for poor people, who at that time were called indigent. Soon she had enough money to buy the land across the street from her house. Then she built the Tubman home for the aged and indigent. Harriet grew vegetables on her farm to feed the poor people who lived at the Tubman home. Harriet also earned money for the Tubman home by giving talks about women's rights. Formerly enslaved Black people had limited rights. During this time, women also had a few rights and were not allowed to vote. Just as Harriet had spoken about ending slavery, she now spoke to help women get the right to vote. As more people learned about Harriet's life and her work to help others, she became even more popular. Around 1897, Harriet received from Queen Victoria of England a letter and a gift, a shawl made of white silk, lace, and linen. Here she is. And she said, "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." When Harriet became too old and frail to work, she gave her properties to her church, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. Harriet knew her church would continue the important work she began. Harriet died on March 10th, 1913. Her amazing life story will be forever loved and respected in American history. So in 1869, she marries Nelson Davis. In 1896, she builds the Tubman Home for the Aged and Indigent. 1908, the Tubman Home accepts its first patients. And in 1913, she dies of pneumonia. Chapter 8. So who was Harriet Tubman? Challenge accepted. Now that you've learned all about Harriet Tubman's amazing and courageous life, let's check your knowledge with this following quiz. You can look, well, you can't really look back. So who was Harriet known as when she was a child? Was she known as Gertie, Minty, Little Harriet, or Miss Sarah? No, it has the answers right. So she was known as Minty. Oh wait, I don't know what these do. So she was known as Minty. What state granted Harriet her freedom when she ran away from the Poplar Neck Plantation? Was it Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, or New York? If you said Pennsylvania, you are correct. She was living in Maryland. When was slavery abolished? 1811, 1842, 1860, or 1865? Slavery was abolished with the ending of the Civil War in 1865. Where did Harriet buy a house for her family and build a home for the poor? That was in Auburn, New York. Why was Harriet considered a hero? Well, maybe you want to answer this question. She risked her life to help free enslaved people. She served as a spy and soldier in the American Civil War. She was an abolitionist. D, all of the above. All right. Move forward there. Okay. That's weird. This must be some kind of weird. Our world. So how has Harriet's work changed our world? Consider a few things that have happened because of Harriet Tubman. Harriet helped people understand the horrors of slavery by giving speeches and lectures about her experience. Harriet led by example, showing how important it is to be an activist and advocate for the less fortunate. Harriet spoke out on the need for Black people and women to have equal rights, including the right to vote. Okay, so you can also consider, so let's think a little bit more about what Harriet Tubman did, how she changed the ways people viewed slavery and women, and how her actions affected our world. Do you think Harriet cared about her popularity or just helping others? Can you imagine how awful life would be for Black people if slavery had not been abolished? What if Harriet had only freed herself? How many generations of family would not exist today? Think about all of the people that she freed that would have not been freed, and their children and their children. If you had the money, would you have opened a home for the sick and poor? Hmm. Do you think Harriet ever imagined that her life would inspire others? So that was the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged and Indigent. Okay. So yeah, that abolished, put an end to something. An abolitionist was someone who favors abolishing something, like abolitionists were people that wanted slavery to end. Activists are people that take action for or against something. Advocates are people who defend others or supports a cause. All right, we won't go through all that glossary, but did want to point out those. Okay, and there was our author, Christine Platt. Different illustrator, Loris Laura, although it did look very similar to the style of our last one that we read on MLK. All right, so I hope you enjoyed the life of Harriet Tubman there, the biography book, and we'll see you next time.